Good morning, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Favorite Album of the Year. Today we're going to take a look at 1973. We started at 1965. Each day we're going to go all the way up to 2019. Of course, we're not going to include 2020 because by the time we get to 2019, we're still going to have a lot left in the year, right? So 2020 is excluded for this kind of countdown. We're going to go up to 2019. Each day I'm going to pick my favorite release from that calendar year. Not the best release from that year, my favorite release from that year, and I am going to ask all of you to do the same. It's been interesting going into the comments and reading everybody's favorite releases because we got a good mix of stuff, right? Because, hundreds, sometimes thousands of people are commenting. Some people pick, these big chart-busting releases. Some people pick stuff that's, really, really near and dear to them, more obscure stuff. It's kind of cool to see everything, right? So many great ones. This shit doesn't get any easier. Does not get any easier. I thought yesterday was tough. 1972. I thought 69 was tough. 70 and 71 were both pretty tough choices. Man, this one was absolutely just agonizing. Because I tell you, here, I want to give you guys a little bit of background on how I kind of try and rationalize this and figure it all out. So, I'm 54 years old, so I've been listening to a lot of these albums. As I've said many, many times, the 70s are my favorite decade for music. I, grew up in the 70s and, in the early 80s, and I really started listening to music big time, like in the mid-late 70s. So a lot of these albums, are longtime personal favorites of mine. So when I look back on these years and see all these great albums, I try to kind of separate things a little bit. So, there's those bands and those albums that are my favorites still to this day, where those albums are really near and dear to me. So what I have to do is I take a look and I pick the albums that, all right, well, what if we were doing this back in 1980 or 85, what would I have chosen back then? Okay. And then I have to stop and say, okay, so what would I have chosen in the second part of my life? Okay. So after I hit like 25 or so, or roughly early 20s and up, so the late 80s, early 90s, which albums would I have chosen that maybe I didn't discover back then in those early years, but discovered later on from that era that have made a huge impact on me since then? All right. So what I do in a lot of these cases, and I especially today, is I had a kind of group of about 10 or 15 of them, right, that I know. All right, there's some here that I've loved since I was a kid, still can't get enough of. And then I have some that I got into a little bit later, maybe in the mid-late 80s, maybe the early 90s, maybe even later than that have made a huge impact on me in the second half of my life. And then I start to take a look and I say, all right, so it's very easy. It would be very easy for me to lean on those old, trusty, comfortable favorites from, 1978, 79, 80, those bands that I, grew up with and, still love those albums, still love them to death. Very highly influential to me. But I can't not take into consideration those that albums I love just as much, but I got into them 10 or 15 or 20 years later, all right, from the same era. So, like I said, I had a list of like 10 or 15, and it was pretty equal. A percentage of them were those trusted favorites. All those usual suspects, because if you've been following me long enough, you know who those are. Then there were some that are considered classics, all right, from this year, from this era, that I know so many people are going to pick. Specifically, there's one, blah, 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 all right? So many people are going to pick that and be like, it's the best album ever. It's the best album by this band. It's the best album of that year. You can't pick anything else. You can't consider anything else. And I love it. But is it my favorite of the year? That's what this comes down to. Our favorites. Not the best, not the biggest selling, not the highest charting. Our favorites. And then there was that percentage of those that from this same year that I got into a little bit later. But man, have they made an impact on me in the latter part of my life and my music listening career. Okay. What I wound up doing in this instance, because there's going to be plenty of times, and you've already seen it a couple times, where I'm going to lean on those old favorites, right? They're still my favorite from that year. I'm still going to do that. That's going to happen. It didn't quite happen today. And I was surprised. And I thought a lot about this. So the one that I picked it's a band that I was listening to back in the day. Not as heavily, but I was listening to them back in the day. But when I decided to dive deeper into their catalog back, like 25 years ago or so ago, I really fell in love with the early part of their catalog a lot. And specifically, this album has come to be a real favorite of mine. It's easily my favorite by the band. It's got some of my favorite songs from the band. I absolutely love their guitar player. He's just so incredible. The whole band, they're a power trio. The whole band is just absolutely amazing, and what they do is just so fantastic. And I don't know, this period I've grown of their music, I've grown to love more and more and more as time has gone on. But this album specifically, I picked over a lot of ones that normally, like I said, if you would have asked me 20, 30 years ago, I wouldn't have even considered this possibly. But today, I really had to go with this because this album has really solidified itself with me as probably my favorite from that year. Okay, we're talking about Tres Hombres by ZZ Top. I know, I figured a lot of you were going to be surprised. I was surprised myself. Like I said, I stacked them all up, and I was like, oh, you know what? Top to bottom, it's really hard to beat, Waiting for the Bus, Jesus Just Left Chicago, Beer Drinkers and Hellraisers, right? LaGrange, Precious and Grace, Master of Sparks. I mean, top to bottom, so many great songs on here. It's heavy. It's bluesy, ripping, crunchy Les Paul tones from Billy Gibbons. Frank Beard and Dusty Hill, man, it's just such a great band. Great album. It's just hard. It was hard for me not to pick that. As much as some other albums were tugging at me, right? Speaking of tugging at me, so my runner-up was equally as hard. Probably harder. Actually, no, the runner-up was harder. I was stuck between picking an old trusty favorite from one of my favorite bands of all time to 3 debuts that are some of my favorite debuts of all time by 3 bands that I absolutely adore. Okay. So then I weeded out the old trusty favorite, and I was down to those 3 debuts. And up until right before I started taping here, I had the other 2 in my hand, and I had all 3 of them next to each other, and I'm staring at them. I'm staring at the back cover and, the track listings. I'm like, oh, my God, this is agonizing. I decided to go with one that's meant a real lot to me. And I was listening to this back when I was younger. In fact, all 3 of them I've been listening to quite a bit. But I decided to go with one over the other 2 just because I think of impact on me, impact on the scene. Such an important album in rock history, and I just absolutely love it, and I still listen to it quite a bit. The first Montrose album beats out Lynyrd Skynyrd's, pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd, and Queen self-titled for my runner-up spot. All 3 are great. Did I agonize having to put Sabbath Bloody Sabbath by Black Sabbath back? Yes. Did I agonize about Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon and The Who's Quadrophenia? Yes. But you know what? When it comes down to it, Tres Hombres is it for me. I just love it. You know what? If you don't, you like others, that's totally cool because that's what the show is all about. So let's see in the comments below, what is your favorite album release from 1973? So many great ones. There's no wrong answer, man. There's so many classics in this year. You can't go wrong with anything you might come up with. I'm telling you can't. It's top to bottom, man. It's like I just God, Band on the Run. So many great things. So many great things by so many great bands. It's just I just absolutely adore this era in music because there was just such quality coming out almost every freaking day. It's mind-boggling to go and look at a list of all the releases for each calendar year from this time period. It's mind-boggling. And then, if you're someone lucky enough to own a good chunk of them, you just feel good all over because you're like, man, this is like history. This is a piece of history that can never be replicated. There will never be another time in the history of the world that is going to be stacked with such quality music releases, whether it's pop, rock, hard rock, prog, southern rock, jazz, blues, doesn't matter, man. It's just absolutely out of control. So the years we've talked about so far, and a lot of the ones coming, it's crazy. The 70s were the best era, the best decade for a lot of things. Arguably some of the best films ever made, right? The best music ever made. It just doesn't get much better. I'm a comic book fan. The comics of the 70s are amazing as well. So there you have it. 1973, ZZ Top's Trace Hombres with a runner-up Montrose self-titled debut. Oh, look at this. It's breakfast time for me. That's looking pretty tasty, huh? Well, nachos and what have you. Anyway, this is on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're on the mighty YouTube all the time. Coming up later today, based on popular request, I am going to give you a ranking of the studio albums of the Alan Parsons Project. Not Alan Parsons solo, just the Alan Parsons Project. So all those project releases. I think there's, 10 or 11 of them, something like that. Anyway, we're going to do that sometime later today. Also want to thank everybody once again. So over the weekend, we surpassed 7 million views here on the channel. We surpassed 35,000 subscribers here on the channel. That's all thanks to you guys. I also want to thank, I had a little bit of a frustrated rant yesterday on yesterday's favorite album of the year show. I would like to say that the positive response to that has been overwhelming, and people just kind of coming on here and posting comments of their love for the channel and for what I'm doing, and so many people just saying how important what I'm doing and how much it impacts you from a day-to-day perspective, especially during these really tough times. That really touched me here. And, I like to think that I'm not just doing this just to do it. I like to think that hopefully we're helping the bands and the artists get their music discovered, but more importantly, we're hoping that just a few minutes with me and Sea Tranquility every day and our illustrious guests that we have on the show allows you a little bit of escapism from everyday life to go and think about music, talk about music, and listen and love music, right? Because that's the reason I do this, okay? So I want to thank everybody, all right? If you've been so kind to donate some couple dollars here and there on our Ko-Fi page, which you can see in the link below, that is fantastic. It helps a lot because, financially this has been tough on our family as well here. So, anything you contribute, if you can, I totally understand. That's totally great. It helps kind of keep me buying music so I can talk about it here on the channel, keep everything going, keep the website going, and remember, watch those ads at the beginning of the video because that will help us greatly because the ad revenue, and YouTube doesn't pay too much for running ads, but every little bit counts. So if you let those 30-second ads run or keep the banner ad going at the bottom during the video, every little bit helps, okay? So I thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart for helping keep this channel alive, and don't you worry just because I was a little frustrated yesterday. We're going to keep going on, right? Nothing's going to stop us now. So thanks again, and tune in later for Alan Parsons Project ranking the studio albums. Thanks for all your views on the Rory Gallagher one. That's if you haven't seen it, go check it out. And we will see you later on, right? Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org for all the latest, greatest reviews, news, interviews, all that good stuff, concert reviews. Visit us on Facebook. Check us out on Twitter. But more importantly, we're here every day on YouTube. So we'll see you guys later on. Take care. Thanks again. Bye-bye.